For 5 straight years, this man outsold every person in the building. But loyalty, it turns. In one room, a signature was being written. In the hallway, a man had no idea. 5 years of records, 5 years of sacrifice, and in 30 seconds, his name was replaced by someone else's. That night, he made a decision no one in that building saw coming, and it would change everything, exactly 1 year later.
Daniel Cole had exactly 40 seconds to decide whether the last 5 years of his life had meant anything at all. And if you stay until the end of this video, you'll understand why that decision changed everything he thought he knew about loyalty, family, and what it truly means to be replaceable. Before we get into it, if stories like this move you, take a second to like this video and subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from. It started, as most quiet tragedies do, without any warning at all. Daniel was 43 years old, a single father raising his 16-year-old daughter Maya, alone since his wife passed away 9 years earlier. He worked at Holloway Motors, a mid-sized but respected car dealership chain that had, over 2 decades, grown into one of the most recognizable names in the region. Daniel had started there as a lot attendant at 23, wiping down windshields and fetching keys for senior salesmen who barely remembered his name. He climbed, slowly and honestly, rung by rung, until he became the top-performing salesman in the entire company, a title he held, without interruption, for 5 consecutive years. He wasn't flashy. He didn't wear expensive watches or drive the newest models off the lot to show off. What Daniel had was something far rarer in that industry. People trusted him. Customers came back to him years later, brought their children to buy their first cars from him, referred their coworkers and neighbors because they knew Daniel wouldn't pressure them into something they couldn't afford. He remembered birthdays. He remembered which families had just had a baby and needed something safer. He remembered which customers had lost a job and needed patience, not a sales pitch. Behind the scenes, Daniel's life outside of work was quietly held together by sheer will. Every morning before his shift, he made breakfast for Maya, packed her lunch, and dropped her at school before racing across town to open the dealership. Every evening, no matter how late the last deal closed, he made it home for dinner, even if that meant reheating something simple at 9 at night while helping her with algebra homework at the same table. He never talked about how tired he was. He never let his exhaustion touch the way he treated a customer or the way he tucked his daughter in at night. To everyone who knew him, Daniel Cole was simply reliable, the kind of man you could set your watch by. The dealership was owned by a man named Richard Holloway, the company's chairman, a wealthy and calculating businessman in his 60s who had built Holloway Motors from a single lot into a chain of 11 locations. Richard respected Daniel's numbers. Every quarterly report, every annual review, Daniel's name sat at the very top, sometimes doubling the sales of the next closest employee. Richard would shake his hand at company dinners, hold him up as an example in meetings, tell new hires, that's the kind of salesman you want to become. But respect for numbers is not the same as loyalty to a person, and Daniel would soon learn the difference the hard way. Richard had a daughter, Vanessa, 28 years old, freshly finished with a business degree from an expensive university, who had spent barely 18 months working at the company in a junior operations role. She was intelligent, no doubt, and eager to prove herself, but she had never sold a single car on the floor. She had never stood across from a nervous young couple trying to figure out how to afford their first family vehicle. She had never learned, the way Daniel had, what it meant to earn a customer's trust one conversation at a time. Still, when the regional sales director position opened up, a role Daniel had quietly hoped for, a role that would have finally recognized 5 years of record-breaking performance, Richard didn't even consider him for more than a passing moment. Within 2 weeks, the position was handed to Vanessa. The announcement happened on a bright Tuesday afternoon. The showroom floor had been decorated with balloons and a small podium. Employees gathered around as Richard proudly introduced his daughter as the company's new regional sales director. Applause filled the room. Daniel stood near the back, clapping along with everyone else because that was simply who he was. Even as something inside his chest quietly cracked, he wasn't angry that Vanessa got the job because she was talented. He genuinely didn't know if she was. Not yet. He was angry and hurt because he realized in that moment that none of it, the 5 years, the loyalty, the sacrifices, the late nights, the customer trust he'd spent a decade building, had ever really been seen. Not the way he thought it had. To Richard Holloway, Daniel wasn't a person who deserved to rise. He was a resource that produced good numbers and stayed quietly in his lane. That night, Daniel sat in his car in the parking garage long after everyone else had gone home. He didn't cry, though he came close. He simply sat there, turning his company badge over in his fingers, thinking about every early morning, every skipped lunch, every moment he'd chosen the dealership's needs over his own comfort. Comfort he could have used to rest or to spend more time with Maya. He thought about what it would mean to keep showing up to a company that had just told him, without saying a single word, exactly where he stood. He drove home that night and didn't say anything to Maya about it. She was at the kitchen table finishing her homework, and when he walked in, she looked up and immediately knew something was wrong. She always could tell. "Bad day?" she asked. Daniel managed a small smile and said only, "Something like that, kid." He wasn't ready to explain it yet, not until he understood it himself. 2 weeks later, Daniel handed in his resignation. Richard was stunned, genuinely surprised, in a way that told Daniel everything he needed to know. Richard had never once imagined that his best salesman might leave, because in Richard's mind, Daniel had nowhere better to go. "You're making a mistake," Richard told him flatly during their final conversation. "You'll never find a place that pays you what we pay you." Daniel simply nodded, shook his hand one last time, and said, "Maybe. But I'd rather build something of my own than keep building something for someone who'll never build anything for me." The first few months after leaving were brutal. Daniel had savings, but not enough to last forever, and he had a daughter counting on him. He spent his days researching, calling old contacts, testing an idea that had been quietly forming in his mind for years, a small, independent used car consultancy built entirely around the thing he actually excelled at: honest, personalized service. No corporate quotas, no pressure tactics. Just genuine relationships with customers who deserved better than they usually got from the industry. He converted his garage into a makeshift office. He built a simple website himself, learning as he went, staying up past midnight after Maya went to bed, fueled by instant coffee and stubborn determination. He reached out to former customers, people he had sold cars to over the past decade, and told them honestly what he was doing. Many of them remembered him instantly. Many of them, without hesitation, said they'd rather work with him directly than ever set foot in Holloway Motors again. Word spread slowly at first, the way trust always does. A referral here, a returning customer there. Daniel didn't have the marketing budget of a big dealership, but he had something Holloway Motors could never replicate: genuine relationships built over 10 years of showing up for people. Maya helped him after school, managing his social media posts, taking photos of vehicles, cheering him on during the nights he doubted himself. 6 months in, Daniel had built a small but loyal client base. 8 months in, he hired his first employee, a young man he remembered mentoring years earlier at Holloway, who had also left after watching how leadership treated its most dedicated people. By the 10th month, Daniel's consultancy had grown into a legitimate small business, operating out of a modest rented office space, with a growing reputation for the kind of honest, patient service that had made him a top seller in the first place. Except now, every success belonged entirely to him and his daughter's future. Almost exactly 1 year after he walked out of Holloway Motors for the last time, Daniel sat at his desk on a quiet Thursday morning, reviewing the past 12 months of numbers his new business had generated. He had not only replaced his old salary, he had surpassed it. More importantly, for the first time in years, he felt like his work and his worth were finally aligned. That same week, by pure coincidence, Daniel received a message through his business page. It was from a former colleague still working at Holloway Motors, letting him know, almost apologetically, that sales at the dealership had noticeably dropped since he left, that several of his old customers had stopped coming in entirely, and that Richard had recently mentioned, in a moment of frustration during a leadership meeting, that letting Daniel go had been harder to recover from than expected. Daniel read the message twice, then closed his laptop and looked over at Maya, who was at the kitchen table finishing her homework, just like she had been that night 1 year earlier. This time, though, there was no ache in his chest. There was only quiet, steady peace. He never went back to Holloway Motors, not even to gloat, because that was never the point. The point had never been proving Richard wrong. The point had been refusing to let someone else define his worth after he had already proven it to himself, every single day, for 5 years straight. Looking back, Daniel would often tell Maya, and later the young employees he mentored in his own growing business, that the hardest part was never the leaving. It was the year before, the years of quietly waiting to be recognized by people who had already decided, long before he did, exactly how much they valued him. The real turning point wasn't the promotion he didn't get. It was the moment he finally understood that loyalty without respect isn't loyalty at all. It's simply patience running out of reasons to stay. By the time his business celebrated its second year, Daniel had expanded to a second small location, staffed almost entirely by people who, like him, had once been overlooked somewhere else and given a real chance for the first time. He kept one small memento on his office wall, not the old plaques from Holloway, but a single photo, Maya, 16 years old, sitting across from him at their kitchen table the night everything changed, the night he decided that being underestimated wasn't the end of his story. It was simply the beginning of a better one.